The rope bit into my wrists as I struggled, the rough fibers scraping against my skin until they burned. I was tied to the old wooden pillar in the center of the living room, the same pillar that had stood in our house since before I was born, a symbol of stability that now became a weapon of control. My breath came out ragged as I twisted, but the knots my mother had tied were merciless, the kind of knots she must have practiced in secret moments when she imagined disciplining me once and for all. I looked up at her, at the woman who gave me life, and all I could see was the cold mask of authority that had shaped my entire childhood. Linda. Morgan, 48 years old, widowed for 6 years, stared down at me with eyes that used to be warm when I was small, but now seemed carved from stone. Her voice was low and steady, as if she were addressing a criminal. You will learn, Rachel, you will finally learn that silence is safer than defiance. My heart pounded so hard it echoed in my ears, and though I wanted to believe this was some nightmare, the sting of the rope told me it was real. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement. My sister Victoria, whom everyone called Vicky, stepped closer. At 24, she looked elegant. Her dark hair pulled back, her lips painted with that crimson shade she always favored. In her hand, she carried a pair of old steel scissors, the kind with heavy blades that glinted under the weak overhead light. Her expression was not that of hesitation or fear. It was cold enjoyment, like a performer preparing for her cue. "Mother, do you really want me to?" she asked, her tone laced with a thrill that made my stomach churn. Linda did not blink. Yes, Victoria, she must understand. She must never raise her voice against us again. My throat went dry. I begged my words, tumbling out fast. "Please, Mom, please, I promise I will be quiet. I will not leave. I will not fight you." But my mother only tilted her head as if I were an insect buzzing near her ear. The betrayal sliced deeper than any blade could. This was not punishment. This was annihilation. Vicky leaned closer, her perfume mixing with the sharp metallic scent of the scissors. Her whisper curled into my ear. "Do you hear that, Rachel? Silence. That is what suits you best." My pulse exploded. I pulled against the ropes until my shoulders ached, but there was no escape. And then it happened. A sudden thrust, the cold kiss of steel against my flesh, a flash of unbearable pain that ripped through my head. My scream tore out raw and animal, filling the room, for one unbearable second before everything went muffled. Sound collapsed into a hollow emptiness. My world cracked into silence. The warmth spreading down my neck told me what had happened even before I fully understood. The scissors had pierced my ear, not a scratch, not a cut, but deep enough to leave me half-deaf in an instant. My vision blurred as tears mixed with the heat of the wound. I could see Vicky's triumphant smirk, the way her chest rose as if she had won some twisted game. I could see my mother's arms folded, her chin lifted high, satisfaction painted across her face. The world around me dulled into nothingness. I tried to cry out, but my voice sounded distant even to myself. I thrashed again, but my strength faltered. My body betrayed me as the ropes held fast. The once familiar living room with its family portraits and polished furniture blurred into a haze. My father's picture still hung on the wall, his smile frozen in time, a cruel reminder of a love that had vanished when he died. If he had been alive, would he have stopped this? Or would he too have turned away? A wave of despair crashed over me, heavier than any pain. This was my family, my mother who tied me down, my sister who stabbed me into silence. And I, Rachel Morgan, 20 years old, was nothing more than a pawn in their hunger for control. My body trembled violently as shock coursed through me. I wanted to scream, to fight, to plead, but the silence that pressed in on me was thicker than stone walls. The contrast was unbearable. One moment the world had been filled with sound, my cry the scrape of the rope, the cruel words of my mother. The next moment, nothing. No echo, no reassurance. Only the dull drum of my heartbeat thundering inside my skull. And then darkness threatened to take me. My head fell forward, my breath's shallow vision narrowing to a tunnel. Yet even in that fading consciousness, I felt the weight of something in my palm. My phone. In the chaos, I had hidden it clutched tight in my bound hands, its screen dark, but its secret alive. Inside that small device was the recording I had made, the whispered conversations of my mother and sister plotting against me. Evidence. Proof. My last weapon. If I could survive this night, if I could ever rise again, that recording would be my salvation. But in that moment, survival itself felt like a dream. I closed my eyes, tears streaking down my face, the pain in my ear screaming silently inside me. I thought of the scholarship letter I had hidden under my pillow, the future I had dared to imagine. College freedom, a chance to breathe without chains. All of it threatened now by the two women who should have loved me most. My body sagged against the pillar. The room spun. And then, as the edges of my vision dissolved into black, I heard, or thought I heard, the faintest whisper. Not through my ears, but inside my mind. It was my own voice, steady and clear. Do not give up. Do not let this be the end. And with that final flicker of defiance, I clutched the phone tighter even as consciousness slipped away. When I woke in that dim hospital room, drifting between pain and numbness, memories came flooding back, not only of what had just happened, but of years that had led me here, years where silence was not new, but simply another form of punishment. My family, the Morgans, had always appeared picture-perfect to the outside world. We lived in a modest but well-kept two-story house in a quiet neighborhood, the kind where lawns were trimmed and neighbors waved politely. Yet behind our door, the air was thick with rules, commands, and the ever-present shadow of comparison. My father, David Morgan, had been the only buffer. He died when I was 14, a sudden heart attack that left my mother a widow and left me without the only parent who had truly seen me. With him gone, the balance shifted entirely. Linda Morgan, my mother, became a force of control that crushed anything in her path. She had always favored my sister Victoria, but after Father's death, that favoritism sharpened into obsession. Victoria was tall, beautiful with striking features that mirrored Linda's own youth. She was the chosen one, the daughter destined to carry forward the Morgan name, the daughter praised at every family gathering, every church service, every community event. And me, Rachel Morgan, the second daughter, was cast into shadow. I was told I was too quiet, too studious, too soft. My achievements never seemed to matter. When I brought home top grades, Linda barely nodded. When I won a local essay contest at 15, she said it was good practice for typing letters for Victoria's future company. That was my play support never shine. The punishments began small. At 10, I was slapped across the face for refusing to lie to a neighbor about why Victoria had missed school. At 12, when I saved allowance to buy a violin secondhand, my mother snapped the strings and told me music was for people with no ambition. By 15, when I dreamed of joining the school choir, she banned me, calling it a waste of time. Each dream crushed, left behind a scar invisible to others but carved deep into me. The most painful memory was the night she used her leather belt. I was 10, and I had spoken out when Victoria took my favorite sketchbook and tore out the pages for fun. I demanded justice. My mother's face hardened. She dragged me to my room, pulled the belt from my father's closet, and lashed it across my back until my cries turned hoarse. I remember clutching the bedsheets, wishing for silence, wishing for escape, while Victoria stood in the hallway smirking, enjoying every second. That night was when I learned what it meant to be powerless in my own home. Still, I held on to slivers of hope. Books became my sanctuary. The local library was my safe place where no one could mock me. I devoured stories of women who rose against impossible odds, who carved paths where none existed. In those pages, I imagined myself escaping. I poured myself into academics, determined that grades would be my ticket out. When I received the scholarship letter at 20, it felt like the universe had finally opened a door just for me. A full scholarship to a respected university meant freedom. I would live in the dorms, meet people who valued me, learn, grow, breathe. For the first time, I allowed myself to dream without restraint. But even in that moment of triumph, fear coiled in my chest. I knew my mother and sister. I knew they would never allow me to leave so easily. My father had left behind a small property in his will, a piece of land on the outskirts of town, and though it was not extravagant, it was worth enough to attract greed. Linda had control over most of the household finances, but legally, that land belonged to me. Father had insisted it be secured for my education. That fact alone painted a target on my back. Linda viewed the scholarship not as my success, but as an insult, a threat to her control, and Victoria saw it as a resource to exploit. When I dared to smile as I read the letter in the kitchen, Linda's eyes narrowed. "Do not get ideas, Rachel. You are not going anywhere until I decide." My stomach dropped. The celebration ended before it began. Days later, Victoria cornered me in the hallway, her nails digging into my arm. She whispered, "If you think you can leave us behind, you are wrong. That scholarship money will go into my business, do you understand?" I pulled away, refusing to answer, but the chill in her voice lingered. Business. That was her obsession, her so-called startup that drained money faster than she could invent new excuses. Linda encouraged it, telling anyone who would listen that her eldest daughter was destined to be a powerful entrepreneur. Meanwhile, I was the unpaid laborer doing chores, cooking, cleaning, existing as background. The night of the scholarship announcement was also the night I dared to fight back openly. I told my mother I would not hand over a cent that the scholarship was mine, and I would go to college whether she approved or not. Her response was swift. She struck me across the face, the sting echoing as she called me selfish. Victoria laughed her laugh, sharp and cruel. "You really think you can survive without us? You would not last a week." I tasted blood in my mouth, but I held my ground. That was the first time I truly saw the depth of their fear. They needed me controlled because freedom for me meant exposure for them. Neighbors would see the truth. Friends would ask questions. Their perfect facade would crumble. The more I resisted, the harsher they became. I learned to hide my feelings to mask every flicker of hope because each time I revealed joy, they crushed it. My father's portrait on the living room wall became both comfort and torment. I would stare at his smiling face and whisper, "Why did you leave me with them?" Yet somewhere deep down I knew it was not his fault, and that thought kept me from hating him. What fueled me was the conviction that his wish for my education would not die. That land, that scholarship, they were my birthright, and no amount of cruelty would erase that truth. This backstory may sound heavy, but for me, it was the air I breathed every day. When you grow up in a house where love is conditional and silence is demanded, you learn to survive by shrinking. I shrank for 20 years. I hid my talents, my laughter, my dreams. And yet in the smallest corners of my heart, rebellion grew. Each punishment hardened me. Each insult sharpened me. And when the chance finally came in the form of that scholarship, I knew this was my one shot. The attack that left me tied to that pillar and half deaf was not the beginning of cruelty. It was the climax of years of suppression. To the outside world, Linda Morgan was a grieving widow raising 2 daughters with dignity. Victoria was the promising young businesswoman, and I was the quiet, obedient child. But inside those walls, the truth festered, the truth of a family that thrived on control, manipulation, and violence. And as I lay in the hospital remembering all of it, I realized something powerful. They had tried to silence me, but in doing so, they had awakened a fire. My suffering was not weakness. It was preparation. One day soon, the silence they forced upon me would become the weapon I used to destroy their lies. The letter sat on my desk for days, its words glowing like a promise, every time I dared to unfold it again. "Congratulations, Rachel Morgan. You have been awarded a full academic scholarship." The paper felt like wings pressed between my fingers, fragile yet powerful, a guarantee of freedom if I could hold on to it. I reread it late at night when the house was quiet, when I could imagine a different life away from my mother's strict gaze and my sister's constant scorn. But secrets never lasted long under Linda Morgan's roof. She found the letter when she was tidying my room without permission, her eyes scanning it with cold precision before she summoned me to the kitchen. The letter lay on the table between us like evidence in a trial, her lips pressed together in a tight line. "So you thought you would run off without telling me?" I swallowed hard, choosing my words carefully. It is an opportunity, Mom. A chance for me to study to build a future. Father wanted this for me. At the mention of my father, her eyes flared with something between anger and grief. Do not use him against me, she snapped. You will not go anywhere unless I allow it. That land your father left that scholarship, they are family resources, not yours to waste. Before I could reply, Victoria entered her heels, clicking against the floor, her presence filling the room with practiced elegance. She picked up the letter, read it quickly, and then smirked. This is good, Rachel. Very good. It will fund my new project. I froze. What do you mean? She handed the letter back carelessly. Scholarships come with stipends, do they not? Living allowances, book funds. It is all money. Money better invested in something real than in your silly dreams. My hands clenched. This is not your money. It is mine. It is for school. Linda's hand came down hard on the table, rattling the silverware. Enough. She stood tall, her voice heavy with finality. You will give your stipend to your sister. She needs it to expand her business. And you will stay here until she is settled. Family comes first. I felt the air leave my lungs. Family came first only when it meant serving Victoria's ambition. When I protested when I raised my voice louder than I ever had before, the back of my mother's hand struck me across the cheek. The sting burned, but what hurt more was the ease with which she hit me as if it were a natural reflex. You selfish girl, she hissed. You think only of yourself. I staggered back, holding my face, my ears ringing. Victoria's laughter followed me like a cruel soundtrack. You see, Mom, she is not ready for the world. She would fail in a week without us. She thrives on our control. I wanted to scream that they were wrong, that I could survive, that I could flourish, but I bit my tongue. Arguing then would only fuel them. I retreated to my room, shut the door, and let the tears fall silently. That night, as I pressed an ice pack against my cheek, I replayed every word in my head. The truth was clearer than ever. They did not fear me failing out in the world. They feared me succeeding without them. For years, they had built their empire of control on my obedience, my silence, my acceptance of their narrative. If I left, if I proved I could build something of my own, their facade would collapse. My scholarship was not just a ticket for me. It was a threat to their power. In the days that followed, the pressure grew. Linda hovered constantly, demanding to know who I called, what emails I sent, which teachers I spoke to. Victoria left brochures for her business projects on my bed, scribbling notes that said, "You will thank me when this succeeds." They spoke of my life as if it were already signed away. Yet beneath their arrogance, I began to sense unease. They argued more whispered in corners, their voices sharp when they thought I could not hear. One afternoon, while carrying laundry past the living room, I caught fragments of their conversation. Linda's voice was stern. She cannot be allowed to leave. That property must be secured in our names. Victoria's tone dripped with confidence. I will handle her. She is weak. She always breaks. My chest tightened, but instead of confronting them, I slipped back to my room and wrote every word down in my journal. Evidence, I reminded myself. Evidence is stronger than emotion. For years, they had accused me of exaggerating, of imagining things. If I wanted to fight back, I needed proof. I bought a cheap second-hand recorder from a pawn shop, hiding it inside my backpack. At night, I pressed it under the couch cushions where they often whispered. Each recording became another brick in the wall I was building against them. Still, the situation worsened. Linda confiscated my mail, demanding to review every letter. Victoria snooped through my phone, deleting emails from the university about housing. My scholarship felt like sand slipping through my fingers, and I fought to hold on. Emotional undulation became my daily rhythm. Hope surged when I saw the scholarship documents still valid. Then despair crushed me when my mother threatened to lock me inside until I complied. Rage boiled when Victoria mocked me at dinner, then fear swallowed it whole when Linda glared in approval. One evening, while clearing dishes, I overheard them again. Linda whispered sharply, "If she resists, we will remind her who has power." Victoria laughed softly. "Maybe tie her down like before." That always works. My blood ran cold. The suggestion was not theoretical. It was a plan, a warning of what awaited me if I pushed too far. I returned to my room, shut the door, and pressed my forehead against the cool glass of the window. Outside, the world stretched wide, full of possibilities. Inside, my life shrank smaller every day. But in that shrinking, a seed of defiance grew. I would not surrender the only chance my father had secured for me. I would not let silence become my cage forever. They thought fear would break me, but fear was turning into fuel. And though I could not yet see the path, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. If I wanted freedom, I had to outsmart them. Control was their weapon, but intelligence, patience, and truth would be mine. The house always had a way of carrying sound, of amplifying whispers meant to be hidden. It was late one evening when I discovered just how much of a curse and blessing that could be. I had gone downstairs for a glass of water, moving carefully so the old floorboards would not betray me. As I reached the kitchen doorway, I heard my mother's voice, low and firm, drifting from the living room. It was not unusual for her and Victoria to stay up late talking about Bill's appearances and how best to flaunt Victoria's supposed business ventures, but the tone this time was sharper, more urgent. I froze, staying just beyond sight, clutching the edge of the doorway, willing myself to remain silent. Linda's voice cut through the stillness. "We cannot wait much longer, Vicky. The land your father left her, the scholarship, everything must be brought under our control. If she leaves for school, we lose leverage." Victoria scoffed, her voice carrying arrogance. "Then do not let her leave. She is naive. She still believes she has a choice. We will make her sign." Linda's sigh followed, tired but determined. "And if she refuses?" A pause. Then Victoria's whisper, cruel and casual. "Then we remind her. We do what we must." My heart thudded so loud I feared they would hear it. The words twisted into my chest, each syllable confirming what I had always suspected, but had hoped was paranoia. They were not just trying to discourage me. They were plotting to take everything, to strip away even the little my father had left in my name. And if I resisted, punishment would be more than words. They had done it before. They would do it again. My throat tightened as I imagined being tied down, silenced, left powerless like a child. For a moment, I nearly stepped out, nearly confronted them in my anger, but instinct told me to wait. Bursting in would only hand them control. I needed to be smarter. I retreated silently to my room, my heart racing, and pulled out the old recorder hidden in my backpack. That night, for the first time, I placed it under the couch where they whispered. My hands trembled as I pressed the button and slid it into place. If I could capture even part of their plan, I would have proof. The next morning, when they left the house for errands, I retrieved the device. My breath caught as I listened to the muffled voices crackling, but clear enough. "Linda. She must not know. We will say it is for tax purposes. Victoria. She is gullible. She will sign if we corner her. And if she does not, well, you know how to make her obey." Hearing it made my stomach twist, yet it also lit a spark of determination. I transferred the recording to my phone, labeled it innocently so they would not suspect, and hid a backup copy on a USB drive. That evening, I tucked the drive into the lining of my old jacket, the one no one ever touched. For the first time in years, I felt like I had a weapon of my own. Still, the danger loomed. At dinner that night, Linda tested me, her eyes narrowing as she asked if I had thought more about transferring the land. I forced a smile, scribbling on my notepad, as though I were the obedient daughter she remembered. "I will consider it," I wrote. Inside, I was screaming, but on the surface, I played my role. Victoria leaned closer, her tone falsely sweet. "You should trust us, Rachel. Family always knows best." Her hand grazed mine in mock affection, and I nearly recoiled, but I remembered the recorder hidden upstairs. I remembered that patience could save me. Emotional undulation became my armor. I let despair wash over me, then clung to the hope of my secret evidence. I tasted fear when they mentioned taxes, but I held on to the silent thrill of knowing I had their words stored safely. Days stretched into weeks. They tightened their control, monitoring my phone, questioning every letter, but I adapted. When Linda accused me of hiding something, I looked down, pretended to be ashamed. When Victoria demanded I hand over my stipend early, I feigned confusion, asking for more time. Their arrogance blinded them. They believed I was still weak. They believed fear had broken me. Yet the more they pressed, the more careful I became. Then came the night when the plan became unmistakably clear. I had gone to bed early pretending to be ill, but I left the recorder running. The next morning, hidden in the bathroom with the shower on to mask any sound I listened, Linda. We will corner her this weekend. I will tie her down if I must. She will sign the papers. Victoria. And if she fights, Linda. Then we make her remember who holds power. The scissors are still in the drawer. My hand flew to my mouth, my breath shuddering. The scissors. The thought of those cold blades near me again made my skin crawl. But this time, I was prepared. I copied the recording to my phone and then sent a backup to Daniel, the only person I trusted. He was my neighbor, a boy I had known since childhood, one of the few who had ever shown me kindness. I did not explain everything, only typed, "Keep this safe. Do not open unless I ask." He agreed, his simple response giving me the first taste of safety in years. That day, as I sat in my room pretending to study, I felt a new clarity. My family saw me as weak as their puppet, as someone too scared to resist. But they had underestimated me. The truth was, every lash of the belt, every insult, every silenced dream had not broken me. They had tempered me. I had been forged in their cruelty, and now I would use their arrogance to undo them. Still, fear lingered. Each time I saw Linda's cold stare or Victoria's mocking smile, I wondered how much longer I could hold out. I wondered if they would sense my deception. The tension built like a storm cloud overhead. At dinner, when Linda mentioned the weekend, my spoon rattled against my bowl. She noticed her eyes sharp. Nervous Rachel. I forced a smile, shaking my head, scribbling on my notepad, just tired. Victoria chuckled softly as if she already anticipated my downfall. That laugh echoed in my head long into the night. Alone in my room, clutching my phone, I whispered to myself, "You have evidence. You have truth. They cannot take that from you." Yet deep inside, I knew the coming weekend would bring a confrontation I might not survive unscathed. The recordings were powerful, but survival was not guaranteed. They had the house, they had strength, and they had no conscience. But for the first time, I felt more than fear. I felt resolve. If they wanted to tie me down, if they wanted to pierce my silence again, then I would endure it, but I would also rise from it. Because this time, I would not just be their victim. This time, I would make sure the world heard the truth they had tried so hard to bury. The weekend arrived with a heaviness that pressed against my chest like an unseen weight. All week, I had lived with the knowledge of what my mother and sister intended their plan to corner me and force me to surrender everything. I kept moving carefully, speaking little, pretending to be the obedient child they wanted, while inside I was wound so tight that every sound made me jump. Saturday evening began like any other, the smell of roasted meat filling the air as Linda insisted on a family dinner. Victoria lingered at the table, tapping her manicured nails against her glass, her eyes fixed on me with an intensity that made my stomach churn. I knew something was coming. When dinner ended and I moved to clear the plates, Linda's hand clamped down on my arm with surprising strength. "Sit!" She ordered, her tone sharp enough to slice through me. I sat, my pulse hammering. Victoria slid a folder across the table, her smile practiced but her eyes gleaming with menace. "These are the transfer papers, Rachel. All you need to do is sign." My breath caught. I stared at the folder, then at their expectant faces. I shook my head slowly, my voice trembling. "I will not. That land is mine. It was Father's gift to me." Linda's expression hardened instantly, her jaw tight as stone. "You ungrateful girl! Do you think you can defy me?" Victoria's laughter rang out cold and sharp. "She always thinks she has a choice. Let us remind her." In an instant, Linda's grip tightened and she pulled me from the chair. My body stumbled against hers as she dragged me into the living room. My voice rose in panic, but she ignored me, her strength unyielding. The rope lay coiled near the old wooden pillar, waiting like a predator. My blood ran cold. They had prepared this. My mother's hands moved with terrifying precision as she bound my wrists to the pillar, the fibers cutting into my skin. I cried out, begged her to stop, but her face was expressionless, as if she were binding not her daughter, but some object that had betrayed her. Victoria circled slowly, pulling open the drawer of the old desk and retrieving the scissors, those same heavy blades that had haunted my nightmares since childhood. The metallic scrape as she opened and closed them echoed like a death knell. My heart thrashed against my ribs. Please, I begged, tears burning down my cheeks. Please do not do this. I will not sign, but you cannot. Linda's voice cut me off cold and final. You will learn silence. You will learn obedience. Victoria stepped closer, her eyes gleaming with excitement. This will only hurt for a moment, she whispered. Her hand gripped my chin, forcing my face to the side. The world narrowed to the flash of steel in her hand. I struggled, twisting against the ropes until my shoulders ached, but the knots held firm. The first sting of metal against my ear made my body convulse, the cold blade pressing against skin too delicate for such cruelty. Then the thrust came, sudden and merciless. Pain exploded through my head, white-hot and blinding. My scream tore from my throat, raw and desperate, filling the air for a fleeting second before the sound collapsed into a ringing void. Silence. Terrible, suffocating silence. My world shifted in an instant from agony to emptiness. I felt warmth spreading down my neck, my vision spinning, my body shaking uncontrollably. Victoria's smirk hovered above me triumphant, while Linda stood with arms crossed, satisfaction etched across her face. My scream faded to nothing. My breath came shallow, each inhale sharp with pain. I tried to cry out again, but my own voice sounded distant, foreign, as though trapped underwater. Terror swelled. I thrashed again, but my body weakened, sagging against the pillar. The living room blurred the family portraits, staring down at me like cruel spectators. My father's smiling face on the wall twisted in my vision, a reminder of what I had lost. Darkness crowded the edges of my sight, and yet even then, even in the midst of searing pain and silence, my hand clutched at the phone hidden in my pocket. Somehow, through the chaos, I had kept it close, the one fragile piece of hope I still possessed. If I lost consciousness now, if I slipped away, the evidence inside would be my only voice left in the world. The emotional undulation ripped through me, rage that they could do this to me. Sorrow that my own family had betrayed me, despair that I might not survive, and yet a faint thread of defiance that refused to die. Linda's voice floated to me, muffled by the ringing emptiness in my head. That will keep her quiet. Now she will remember her place. Victoria wiped the scissors on a cloth, her laughter muffled but clear enough in my heart. She thinks she is clever, but she is nothing. My vision blurred fully, then consciousness slipping like sand through fingers. The last thing I felt was the tight grip of my fingers around the phone, as though my very soul clung to that piece of evidence. Then the darkness consumed me. The antiseptic smell of the hospital was the first thing I noticed when consciousness returned, sharp and sterile, invading my senses. My body felt heavy, pinned by unseen weights, my throat raw from screams that had vanished into silence. I blinked against the bright overhead lights and tried to shift, but pain shot through my head, radiating from the bandaged ear down my neck. The world sounded strange, muffled on one side, unbalanced, as though half of reality had been erased. A nurse leaned over me, her lips moving slowly. For a moment, I could not tell if I was truly hearing her or just imagining. Then her voice seeped through faintly into my good ear. You are safe now. Rest. But was I safe? My mind replayed everything: the ropes, the scissors, my mother's cold stare, Victoria's smirk. Fear jolted through me until I realized my phone was still tucked inside the folds of my hospital gown. Somehow in the chaos it had remained with me. Relief poured through me like a fragile lifeline. My mother stood in the corner when I turned my head. She had perfected her mask of sorrow, her voice smooth when the nurse asked what had happened. A terrible accident, she explained. My daughter tripped. The scissors cut her ear. I wanted to scream the truth, to tell the nurse that I had been tied and stabbed, but something held me back. The flicker of recognition in the nurse's eyes told me she was not fully convinced, yet she had no proof. Proof was all that mattered. Proof was what I held in my hand, hidden in the device pressed against my chest. When Linda leaned down to stroke my hair, her fingers cold, she whispered so only I could hear, "Say nothing. Remember your place." My body tensed, but I forced myself to look blank to play the role she expected. The urge to shout the truth was nearly unbearable, but instinct screamed louder. If I exposed everything too soon, they would find a way to twist it. If I kept silent, I could plan. That was the beginning of my resistance. The doctors asked questions, but Linda answered for me, spinning the tale of an accident with rehearsed ease. Victoria even shed a few crocodile tears, wringing her hands dramatically. They had played this game before, yet beneath their performance, I detected cracks. Victoria's gaze darted nervously when the doctor mentioned the depth of the wound. Linda pressed her lips too tightly when the nurse suggested reporting the injury for review. They were not as flawless as they believed. When the doctors finally left us alone, I turned my face toward the wall, pretending to drift back into unconsciousness. In reality, I was memorizing every detail, every slip in their facade, every glance that betrayed guilt. Later that night, when the hospital quieted and the rhythmic beeping of machines became my only companion, I pulled my phone from the folds of the blanket. My hands shook as I unlocked it, opening the voice recordings. The file was there. The conversation I had captured before the attack, their plotting clear and undeniable. My heart pounded. I could not keep it only on my phone. If they found it, they would destroy it. Summoning every ounce of energy, I opened a message to Daniel, my childhood neighbor, and the only person I trusted. I attached the file with a brief note. "Keep this. Do not open unless I tell you. Please." Moments later, his reply came. "Got it. Are you okay?" I stared at his words, tears stinging my eyes, but I could not answer more. The risk was too high. I locked the phone and slid it back into hiding. My body throbbed with pain, but my mind was alive with purpose. I would pretend to be broken. I would act as if I had lost more than my hearing, as if fear had crushed me completely. And in that act, I would gather everything I needed. The next day, Linda and Victoria visited again, their voices sweetened for the doctors, but sharp when the room emptied. "You nearly ruined us," Linda hissed under her breath. "Do not forget who you owe your life to." Victoria smirked. "Maybe next time you will sign without fuss." I looked at them with glassy eyes, feigned weakness, and scribbled on the notepad they provided. "I do not remember." Their faces lit with smug satisfaction, convinced my mind had fractured, convinced I was their puppet again. Inside, I burned. If they believed I was powerless, they would lower their guard. If they lowered their guard, I would strike. In the following weeks after I was discharged, life at home returned to its suffocating rhythm, but with one crucial difference. I no longer fought them openly. I nodded when Linda demanded obedience. I scribbled simple answers when Victoria mocked me. I played the role of the broken daughter who had finally been tamed. And while they reveled in their false victory, I wrote in my journal every night, documenting each act of cruelty, each conversation overheard. I began hiding small cameras gifts from Daniel, who slipped them to me when no one was watching. A button camera tucked near the bookshelf. A pen with a tiny lens left on the kitchen counter. Slowly, piece by piece, I built a case against them. Emotional undulation ruled my days. Terror surged when Victoria slammed a door near my injured ear, mocking my flinch. Then hope returned when I replayed a recording of her admitting she wanted my scholarship money. Despair flooded me when Linda locked my bedroom door at night, her way of reminding me she still held power. Then satisfaction warmed me when I copied another file to a secret USB and hid it in the lining of my jacket. My silence was no longer their victory. It was my disguise. They thought I had become weaker, but in truth, I was becoming stronger. I began to see their cracks widening. Linda's voice shook when she argued with Victoria about finances. Victoria's arrogance slipped when a business deal collapsed. They needed my compliance more than ever, and that dependence blinded them. They did not notice the way my eyes lingered on my father's portrait, the silent promise I made to him each night. They did not notice the way I leaned closer when they whispered feigning confusion while hearing every poisonous word. They thought silence meant surrender. But for me, silence had become strategy. And in that silence, my plan began to take shape. The days after my return from the hospital blurred into a strange theater of performance, a stage where I played the part of the fragile, broken daughter while my mother and sister delivered their lines with arrogance. Every morning, Linda would knock on my door, not out of genuine care, but to check if I remained docile. She would set down breakfast with a practiced sigh and remind me in a sickly sweet tone that accidents happen when stubborn girls do not listen. I would nod, lower my eyes, and scribble short notes that said nothing of substance. Victoria, on the other hand, thrived in her role as overseer. She strutted around the house as if she were queen, speaking slowly and loudly, as though I could not comprehend mocking my supposed disability. "Can you hear me, Rachel?" she would jeer, waving her hand in front of my face. "Or are you trapped in silence forever?" I let her think she was right, never flinching, never breaking the illusion. It was exhausting, but it gave me room to breathe, to plan, to gather. Daniel had become my quiet ally, slipping small devices into my hands when we crossed paths in the yard or at the store. A pen camera, a watch with recording ability, a tiny flash drive shaped like a key. I accepted each one with gratitude, hiding them carefully among my belongings. The first time I used the button camera, my heart raced so violently I thought I might faint. I placed it on the bookshelf in the living room, angled toward the couch where Linda and Victoria often whispered about finances. Hours later, when the house grew quiet, I retrieved it, locked myself in my room, and replayed the footage. There they were sipping wine, Victoria's legs crossed elegantly, Linda leaning forward with intensity. The words came out crisp and clear. "Linda, we need that land before the year ends. If she refuses again, we will push harder. Victoria, she is too scared now. You saw her face. She is broken. Linda, do not underestimate her. Broken things can cut." I paused the recording, my chest tightening. My mother's words revealed both her cruelty and her suspicion. She doubted me, but she still believed in her control. That gave me a narrow path to walk, one where I could remain underestimated just long enough to finish what I had started. The recordings piled up quickly. Another day, I captured Victoria bragging over the phone about how soon she would own property worth hundreds of thousands. Another night, I recorded Linda scolding her for spending money too freely, reminding her that once the land was signed over, they would have stability again. Each snippet was a thread, and together they formed a web strong enough to entangle them both. Yet each success carried danger. One afternoon, as I scribbled quietly at the dining table, Victoria suddenly leaned over and yanked my notebook away. "What do you write all the time?" she sneered. "Secrets." My pulse jumped, but I kept my face blank, just poems I scribbled quickly on another scrap. She flipped through the pages, her smirk faltering as she saw only lines of carefully crafted verse. She threw it back with a scoff. "Pathetic." My hands shook under the table, for she had nearly uncovered pages where I detailed dates, times, and incidents. From that day forward, I became even more cautious, separating the real journal into two, one of meaningless poems to serve as decoy, and the other hidden deep beneath the floorboard under my bed. Emotional undulation marked every hour. I would feel the rush of triumph when a camera captured Victoria shouting that I was useless, then sink into dread when Linda's shadow passed too close to my door. I would swell with pride reading back transcripts of their schemes, then crumble into tears at night when the silence in my ear reminded me of what they had taken from me. But in those tears, I found resolve. My silence was my camouflage. They continued to believe I was powerless, and that belief was my shield. One night, I left the camera running in the kitchen while pretending to sleep. In the morning, I listened as Linda and Victoria argued. Victoria, "We should just force her again." Linda, "No." The last incident nearly drew suspicion. "We need subtlety now. Victoria's subtlety is boring. I want results." Linda, "Control your temper. If she signs under duress again, the authorities could question it. We need her compliance on record." That single conversation was gold. It proved intent, proved they were conspiring. I transferred it immediately to a USB and hid it beneath a loose brick in the fireplace. I told myself that even if they destroyed everything else, even if they silenced me permanently, these fragments would survive. My ally, Daniel, grew more important each week. He noticed the bruises on my wrists one day when I handed him a note across the fence. He said nothing aloud, just pressed his lips tight and slipped a small camera into my palm. His silence was understanding, his eyes a promise. In my darkest hours, that look kept me steady. Still, the tension grew unbearable. Linda began pressing again, leaving documents on the kitchen table, demanding signatures. I shook my head each time, feigning confusion, writing clumsy words like "I do not understand." Her frustration simmered hotter each day. Victoria's cruelty escalated. She once slammed a cupboard door so close to my head that I felt the rush of air. Another time, she leaned down while I folded laundry and whispered, "You should have died when you had the chance." I clenched my fists but forced my face to remain blank. Each cruel act became another entry in my journal, another drop of fuel for the fire I was building. Slowly, the pieces began to align. The recordings, the journal, the USB copies, all were evidence. The only thing missing was the perfect stage. I knew that if I wanted true justice, it could not happen in secret. It had to be public, undeniable, a revelation that would shatter their mask before witnesses. Until then, I remained the broken daughter, quiet, compliant, eyes lowered. But inside, I sharpened myself every day, waiting for the moment when silence would transform into the loudest truth they had ever heard. The day of my mother's carefully planned family dinner arrived cloaked in false warmth. The dining room gleamed with polished silverware, crystal glasses, and my father's portrait presiding from the wall, his eyes seeming to watch the theater that was about to unfold. Linda had insisted the event was for unity for appearances, though I knew it was a stage she and Victoria had set for another attempt to force my signature. But what they could not know was that it would become the stage for their downfall. I entered the room slowly, limping slightly, the bandage still covering my damaged ear. My posture bent as though the injury had broken me more than it truly had. My mother's eyes lit with smug satisfaction at the sight. She believed the act completely. "Sit, Rachel," she said, gesturing toward the seat nearest her at the long table. Her tone was calm, but beneath it lay the same authority that had bound me to that pillar. I obeyed silently, head-bowed hands trembling as though from fear, though in truth they trembled from anticipation. Guests arrived soon after, a few distant relatives, 2 of Linda's church friends, and even an old neighbor she respected for his connections. Linda loved an audience. She thrived on admiration, on the illusion of control and sophistication. Victoria glided into the room in a fitted dress, her heels clicking sharply, her smirk reserved just for me. She leaned down, her whisper like a blade. "Tonight you will sign." I kept my face blank, my pen poised over the notepad where I scribbled slow, clumsy words. "I am tired. We will see." Dinner began with laughter and forced conversation. Linda played the gracious hostess, passing dishes with feigned generosity, while Victoria engaged the guests with stories of her budding business. I ate little, my stomach twisting with nerves, but my eyes observed everything the way Linda's hand hovered protectively over the folder near her plate, the one containing the documents, the way Victoria's gaze darted to me repeatedly, calculating. When dessert was finished, Linda cleared her throat, her smile radiant, but her eyes sharp. "Before we finish the evening, I would like to address a matter of importance." She slid the folder into the center of the table, flipping it open with theatrical precision. "These are simple documents, just some property adjustments to secure our family's stability. Rachel will sign tonight." Gasps murmured from the guests. The old neighbor adjusted his glasses, curiosity flashing in his eyes. Victoria placed a pen before me, her hand firm as she pushed it closer. "Sign Rachel. This is for all of us." I lifted my gaze slowly, letting the silence stretch, letting them believe hesitation was weakness. Then I reached into my pocket, my fingers brushing against the cool metal of the USB Daniel had prepared. My heart thundered as I placed it beside my plate. Linda frowned. "What is that?" Without a word, I nodded to Daniel, who had slipped quietly into the back of the room at my request. He carried a small portable speaker, innocuous to most, but everything to me. With one flick of his hand, the recording began. At first, it was faint, a muffled shuffle. Then, Linda's unmistakable voice filled the room. "We cannot wait much longer. That land your father left her the scholarship, everything must be brought under our control. If she leaves for school, we lose leverage." A ripple passed through the room. Guests shifted uncomfortably, eyes widening. Victoria's face paled. I kept my expression blank, watching them unravel. Then Victoria's voice echoed clear and cruel. "Then do not let her leave. She is naive. She still believes she has a choice. We will make her sign, and if she refuses, then we remind her, we do what we must." The room froze. Linda's fork clattered against her plate. The church friends stared, mouths open. The neighbor leaned forward in shock. My chest swelled with vindication. I let the silence stretch before another clip played Victoria, laughing, bragging about her business funded by money she planned to steal. Linda scolding her for overspending. The proof was undeniable, the voices unmistakable. Victoria lunged for the device, panic flooding her features, but Daniel stepped between us, calm but firm. "Sit down," he told her. For once, she obeyed, trembling with fury. Linda's composure cracked her voice, trembling. "Rachel, where did you get this?" My hands shook as I scribbled on the notepad deliberately. I heard everything. I recorded everything, and I am not afraid anymore. Gasps filled the room again. The old neighbor stood abruptly, pointing at Linda. "Is this true? You were planning to take from your own daughter." Linda stammered, her mask crumbling. "Lies. Fabrications." She is confused. But the next clip silenced her defense. Linda's own voice. "If she refuses again, we will push harder. I will tie her down if I must. The scissors are still in the drawer." Every eye turned toward me then, seeing not the broken girl they imagined, but the survivor standing before them with the truth in hand. Tears welled in my eyes, but they were not of weakness. They were of release, of justice finally breathing. I lifted my head, my voice trembling but strong enough to carry. "This is what they did to me. They tied me to that pillar. They pierced my ear. They silenced me. But I am not silent anymore." The shock that rippled through the guests became outrage. One of Linda's church friends shook her head in disbelief. "How could you, Linda? To your own child?" Victoria buried her face in her hands, mascara streaking down her cheeks, while Linda rose to her feet, her voice desperate. "Enough! You will not destroy this family." But it was too late. The door opened and uniformed officers stepped in, summoned by Daniel with the evidence I had entrusted to him weeks earlier. The room erupted in chaos. Linda shouted. Victoria protested, but the officers remained calm, reading charges of abuse, coercion, and attempted fraud. My heart hammered as I watched my mother's wrists pulled behind her back, the snap of handcuffs sharp and final. Victoria struggled, shouting that it was all lies, but another set of cuffs silenced her fight. The guests watched in stunned silence, their faces pale with shock, some with tears, others with cold fury. For years, my mother and sister had worn masks of respectability admired by neighbors and friends. Tonight, those masks shattered. Tonight, the truth was louder than their lies. As the officers led them out, Linda turned her head toward me, her eyes wide with a mixture of rage and fear. "You think you have won, Rachel?" she spat. "You think this ends here?" I met her gaze steadily, my own voice clear. "No, Mother. This is only the beginning." The room held its breath. I sank back into my chair, the adrenaline finally loosening its grip. My hands shook as Daniel placed his hand gently on my shoulder, steadying me. The guests murmured, some reaching for me, others whispering to each other. My father's portrait hung above us, his smile frozen in time, but for the first time I felt his presence as a shield, as though he too had witnessed justice unfold. Emotional undulations surged through me, fear lingering from the confrontation, triumph glowing from the reveal, grief that my family had chosen betrayal, and relief that the world now knew the truth. The silence in my damaged ear remained, but in my heart the silence was broken forever. The night of the dinner became a turning point not just for me, but but for everyone who had ever believed in the illusion of the Morgan family. The image of Linda and Victoria being escorted out in handcuffs lingered in the minds of the guests who had once admired them, and whispers spread across the neighborhood before the sun even rose the next day. By morning, our house, once a fortress of secrets, had become the subject of quiet conversations and pointed stares. I sat at the kitchen table with Daniel across from me, the weight of the previous night still pressing heavily on my chest. He poured tea for us both, his steady presence anchoring me in the storm. The silence in my ear was constant, a reminder of what they had taken. Yet the sound in my other ear, the whistle of the kettle, the creak of the chair beneath Daniel, reminded me that I was still alive, still standing. The first official call came from the police detective handling the case. They had reviewed the recordings and the footage I provided, as well as my journal entries. Combined with the testimony of the guests who had witnessed the reveal, the evidence was more than sufficient. Linda and Victoria were facing charges of assault, coercion fraud, and attempted theft. Hearing those words should have brought me relief, yet I felt a hollow ache. These were my family members, the people who should have protected me. Now they were defendants in a courtroom battle that would expose every dark corner of our lives. The trial was set for the following month. In the weeks leading up to it, the tension only grew. Some relatives tried to reach out, half out of concern, half out of curiosity. But I kept my responses measured. I could not bear to relive every detail for them, not when my nights were already filled with nightmares of the pillar and the scissors. Still, I knew I had to be strong. I had to let the truth speak louder than my pain. When the trial began, the courthouse buzzed with reporters drawn by the shocking nature of the case. A mother and daughter accused of attacking another daughter for property and money. The courtroom itself felt like a stage, every seat filled, every eye fixed on me as I walked to the witness stand. My knees trembled, but I forced myself forward, remembering the weight of the phone in my hand, the night I recorded their plotting, remembering the warmth of Daniel's support when I doubted myself. The prosecutor asked me to describe what happened, and my voice quavered as I spoke of the night I was tied to the pillar of Victoria's hand, forcing the scissors near my ear, of the agony that followed. I spoke of the years of neglect, the favoritism, the insults, the belts, and locked doors. Each word felt like ripping open an old wound, but I refused to falter. Linda sat at the defense table, her eyes hard, her jaw clenched as though sheer willpower could undo the truth. Victoria stared at the floor, her face pale, her once proud posture crumbling under the weight of evidence. When the recordings played for the jury, the sound of their own voices plotting filled the courtroom. Some jurors flinched, others shook their heads in disgust. I watched as Linda's composure cracked further, her mask slipping in real time. The defense tried to paint me as unstable, exaggerating events for attention. They suggested the injury had been an accident, that I had misinterpreted conversations taken out of context. But the evidence was relentless. Footage of Linda and Victoria arguing about my land. Audio of Linda admitting she would tie me down. Victoria laughing about using my scholarship money. And the witnesses from the dinner who had seen with their own eyes the unmasking. The emotional undulation was unbearable at times. Despair when I heard my own scream on a recording triumph, when the prosecutor dismantled the defense's lies. Anger when I remembered the smugness of their cruelty. Hope when I saw jurors nodding at the evidence. After 2 weeks of testimony, the verdict came. Guilty. Linda Morgan, guilty of assault, coercion, attempted fraud, and conspiracy. Victoria Morgan, guilty of assault with a deadly weapon, conspiracy, and financial misconduct. The sentencing came a week later. Linda received 12 years in prison. Victoria received 8. Their pleas for leniency fell flat, drowned beneath the weight of their actions. As the judge read the sentences, I felt both relief and grief. Justice had been delivered, but it came at the cost of family ties that could never be mended. After the trial, the world shifted again. The property my father had left me was secured legally in my name, protected from any further manipulation. The scholarship board, who had heard of the case through news reports, reached out to assure me that my place at the university remained safe, my funding intact. They even offered additional support for medical expenses. The doctors confirmed what I already knew: my hearing would never return in the damaged ear. The eardrum had been punctured beyond repair. The silence was permanent. At first, the permanence crushed me. I lay awake at night, pressing my fingers against my ear, hoping for even a faint echo. But over time, I began to see it differently. The silence was a scar, yes, but also a testament. It was proof that I had survived, that I had endured the worst they could do and still risen. Meanwhile, Linda and Victoria's collapse was swift. Friends distanced themselves, neighbors whispered about the once respected family, now branded criminals. Victoria's supposed business ventures evaporated as partners fled, unwilling to be associated with scandal. Linda's position in the church dissolved her once loyal allies, horrified by the truth. The empire of control they had built crumbled into dust. Yet, amid their fall, I found new strength. With Daniel's encouragement, I began speaking to local groups about resilience, about surviving toxic families, about the importance of evidence and support. My story, once a source of shame, became a beacon for others trapped in silence. Emotional undulation guided me even in those speeches. Sharing the darkest moments brought tears, but ending with the triumph of justice brought hope. Each time the audience leaned forward, gripped by the arc of suffering to victory. Each time I felt a little lighter, a little freer. I visited my father's grave after the sentencing, the cool autumn breeze rustling the leaves around me. I knelt, pressing my hand against the stone. "I kept your promise safe," I whispered. "They tried to take it, but I did not let them. I hope you are proud." For the first time in years, peace settled over me, not complete, but enough. I stood taller, the silence in my ear no longer a void, but a reminder of the battle I had won. The consequences had landed heavily on my mother and sister, but they had also reshaped me. I was no longer the frightened girl bound to a pillar. I was the woman who had stood fought and revealed the truth. The months after the trial unfolded like a second life, a rebirth I had never imagined possible when I lay bound to that pillar, blood in my ear and silence swallowing my scream. At first, I moved through days cautiously, expecting shadows at every corner, afraid that Linda's glare or Victoria's smirk might suddenly reappear. But each morning I woke to find the house quieter, calmer. No footsteps of control pounding down the hallway. No sharp voices cutting into my confidence. Their absence became the soil where something new could grow. The scholarship board connected me with counselors and mentors who had worked with survivors of violence. At first, I resisted. Talking about my past felt like ripping wounds open again. But gradually, I realized that each word I spoke was a stitch closing those wounds. Sharing my pain with people who listened without judgment gave me a freedom I had never known inside my own family. Daniel remained by my side through every step. He walked me to doctor's appointments, sat beside me in lectures when I returned to campus, and helped me navigate the strange new quiet of partial deafness. When the world overwhelmed me, when I spun at the sound of sudden laughter on one side, while the other side remained void, he squeezed my hand, grounding me. His steady presence reminded me that trust and loyalty were still possible. Out of my savings, the restitution awarded by the court, and my scholarship funds, I began the process of establishing something bigger than myself. I named it the Morgan Foundation for Survivors, a place where people like me could find not only legal support, but also counseling, shelter, and scholarships to rebuild their lives. Some questioned why I used the Morgan name, a name soiled by cruelty, but I chose it deliberately. It was no longer their name. It was mine. I would carve it into something honorable, something strong. The first event we held was a small seminar at the university where I stood at the podium with my hearing aid visible in my damaged ear, my voice steady. The hall was filled with students, professors, community members, and even reporters curious about the transformation of a girl once labeled a victim. I began with the truth. Imprisoned by silence, I thought I would never be heard again. But silence became my strength. It taught me to listen not just with my ears, but with my heart. The audience leaned forward, gripped by the shift of despair into resilience, by the emotional undulation that mirrored my journey. Tears shone in eyes across the room when I described the night at the pillar. Gasps escaped when I revealed the betrayal of my own family, and hopeful nods spread when I spoke of the justice that followed. I ended with a promise. No one deserves to be broken in silence. If you know someone trapped in shadows, help them find light. If you are that someone, know you are not alone. After the applause, loud, thunderous, the kind of sound I had once taken for granted, I sat on the stage steps, overwhelmed. Students approached, some crying, some thanking me, some whispering stories of their own families. In that moment, I realized my suffering had not been in vain. It had become a torch that could guide others out of darkness. Yet healing was not linear. There were nights when nightmares pulled me back to the pillar, when I woke with a scream lodged in my throat, and the silence of my ear felt like a tomb. On those nights, I walked the quiet streets until dawn, reminding myself that I had survived. I planted flowers in the yard, each bloom a reminder of life persisting despite cruelty. I decorated my walls with quotes about courage and survival, replacing the old portraits that had once watched over me with judgment. I allowed myself to laugh again, small bursts at first, then louder, fuller. The sound startled me, echoing differently in my head with only one functioning ear, but I welcomed it as a sign that joy had not died within me. One afternoon months later, I stood in front of a group of high school students invited to speak about resilience. As I looked into their young faces, I remembered myself at their age, bruised, silenced, doubting my worth. I told them that pain does not define you, that family is not always blood, that strength sometimes looks like silence, and other times like shouting in a courtroom. I watched their eyes widen, their bodies lean forward, and I felt my father's presence again proud. The foundation grew. Volunteers joined. Survivors found refuge. Each success layered new bricks into the fortress of hope I was building. The name Morgan began to mean resilience, not abuse. On the anniversary of the trial, I held a press conference to announce the official opening of a community center dedicated to survivors. Reporters filled the room, cameras clicking, microphones thrust forward. I stood tall, my hearing aid glinting under the lights, my voice carrying with clarity. This center is not about me alone. It is about every voice that was silenced, every dream crushed, every soul forced into darkness. Here, silence will no longer be weaponized. Here, silence will be transformed into strength. The applause roared again, washing over me like a tide, each sound a gift. Afterward, I walked outside into the evening air, Daniel at my side. The city hummed with life, car horns, footsteps, distant music, and though one ear still heard only emptiness, I felt surrounded by sound, surrounded by possibility. I thought of Linda and Victoria locked away facing the consequences of their choices. For a time, the thought brought bitterness, but now it brought closure. They had chosen cruelty, and cruelty had chosen their end. I had chosen survival, and survival had opened the path to a life they could never imagine. Emotional undulation defined even this ending sadness that family had been lost, relief that justice had prevailed, pride that I had transformed pain into purpose, hope that the cycle would be broken for others. On a quiet Sunday morning, I visited my father's grave again. The wind rustled the leaves, birds sang faintly, the world alive with sound I had once thought gone forever. I knelt, touching the stone. "I am whole again," I whispered. Not because the silence is gone, but because I have learned to live with it to make it mine. I left a small bouquet, the colors bright against the gray, a symbol of life reclaimed. Walking away, I knew my story was not just mine anymore. It belonged to everyone who had ever felt bound to a pillar, silenced by those who should have protected them. And to each of them, my life was now a message: you can endure. You can fight. You can rebuild. As I walked away from my father's grave that morning, the sun rising higher over the trees, I realized something important. Stories like mine are not just stories. They are warnings, lessons, and in many ways, invitations. They remind us of how fragile trust can be, how dangerous silence can become, and how necessary it is to speak the truth even when every part of you has been taught to keep quiet. And if you have been listening all this time, if you stayed with me through every high and low, then maybe you see yourself in my journey. Maybe you remember moments when someone you trusted betrayed you, or times when silence weighed heavier than words. Or maybe you know someone right now, a friend, a sibling, a child who is still bound to their own pillar, who has not yet found the strength to break free. That is why I am here and why I am telling this story in the first place. Not just to relive the pain, Not just to celebrate survival, but to reach out across this invisible space between us and ask you what part of my story spoke to you the most. Was it the moment of cruelty when I was forced into silence? Was it the slow gathering of courage when I chose to play weak only so I could grow stronger? Or was it the moment of public unmasking when lies fell apart and truth roared louder than fear? Each of us carries memories like that, turning points where we had to decide who we wanted to be and whether we were willing to fight for it. And I want to hear from you. If you are watching from your living room, from a kitchen table, from a hospital bed, from a quiet office late at night, leave a comment below and tell me, where are you watching from? You would be surprised how powerful that small act is, because it reminds you that you are part of a community. You are not alone. Others will read your words and recognize pieces of themselves. They will nod. They will whisper, "I know that feeling," and that connection is the start of healing. Now, I want to speak especially to those of you who are older, those in your 50s, 60s, 70s, or beyond. Life has already shown you so much, hasn't it? The betrayals sting deeper because you thought you were past them. The silences feel louder because you know how much time has already been lost. But here's what I've learned: it is never too late to reclaim your voice. It is never too late to set boundaries, to demand justice, to rebuild what others tried to take from you. Whether you are 20, 50, or 80, survival is not bound by age. Courage does not retire. And healing belongs to anyone willing to face the truth. So if this story moved you, if it sparked anger or sorrow, or even hope inside you, don't just let it fade as soon as the video ends. Write something in the comments. Tell me if you've ever been silenced. Tell me if you've ever stood up when everyone expected you to bow down. Or if you're not ready to share details, simply say, "I understand." You will be amazed by how many people respond, how many nod quietly from across the world. And that solidarity, it matters more than you know. I also ask you to subscribe to this channel if you haven't yet. Why? Because every time you do, you're not just helping me share stories, you're strengthening a platform where truth is valued, where survivors are honored, where silence is turned into strength. Each subscription is like a brick in the foundation we are building together. And if you click that little bell, you will be here for the next story, ready to feel, to learn, to grow, and to connect. Now let me ask you another question. How many times in your life have you heard someone say family is everything? And yet how many times has that same family failed to live up to those words? I know many of you understand the sting of favoritism, of neglect, of being treated as if your worth depended on obedience or silence. In some ways, my story is not unique at all. It is the story of countless people whose parents chose power over love, whose siblings chose envy over loyalty. That is why I tell it. That is why I want you to hear it. Because when you recognize these patterns, when you see them clearly, you begin to break them. And maybe by breaking them in your own life, you save the next generation from carrying the same chains. So here is my invitation to you. If you are watching this, pause for a moment and think of someone you know who needs to hear it. Maybe it's a friend going through a bitter inheritance fight. Maybe it's a relative trapped in a controlling relationship. Maybe it's your younger self, the one still curled up inside you, who never got to hear that it wasn't their fault. Share this video with them. Send it in a message. Post it in a group. Whisper about it at the coffee table. Because sometimes the right story at the right time is what saves a life. And to those of you who feel compelled to go further, who want to not only listen but also support, consider leaving a like on this video or even supporting through the small tip link in the description. Every like, every share, every small contribution is fuel that helps me keep creating, keep telling, keep shining a light where darkness thrives. But more than any of that, I want you to carry this message with you when you leave. Silence can destroy, but it can also empower. Silence is dangerous when it is forced, when it is used to cage you. But silence becomes powerful when you choose it, when you use it as a shield, until the moment you are ready to speak. That is what saved me. That is what can save you too. I imagine many of you watching are sitting in quiet rooms. Maybe you are alone. Maybe you are beside someone who doesn't know what you carry inside. Maybe you are wondering if your story matters, if your voice would make any difference. Let me answer that for you now. Yes, it matters. Yes, it makes a difference. Yes, you deserve to be heard. So let this story be a reminder, a spark, a companion in the night. And as always, I will end with gratitude. Thank you for staying with me through this journey. Thank you for lending me your time, your attention, your heart. It is not a small thing. Every comment you write, every click of that subscribe button, every share, you are building something with me. You are proving that stories have power, that truth has weight, that healing is possible. So before you click away, do one thing for yourself. Type in the comments right now, "I hear you." That's it. Simple words, but powerful. When others scroll down and see that line repeated, they will know this is not just a channel. It is a community, a place where brokenness does not end in silence but in connection. And remember this as you go back to your day. You are not too late. You are not too broken. You are not alone. Together, we are turning silence into strength. Together, we are rewriting what family, what loyalty, what love can mean. I will see you in the next story. Until then, stay safe, stay strong, and keep listening, not only with your ears, but with your heart. Because sometimes the most important truths are the ones we feel before we even hear them.